I remember years ago, we were pastoring a small church, and there was a young man, and he came to me and he said, could you go to the hospital and pray for my Uncle Butch? And I said, certainly. And I said, why is there no one praying for him? He said, no. And I said, well, before we go visit somebody in ICU, he was in a very grave situation, I said, we should talk to his family. So we went to his house to talk to his wife and asked permission if we could go and pray for Butch in the ICU. The house was filled with empty beer cans, people partying, gambling, smoking. And as I went to his wife and I asked, was Butch a religious man? And she put a cigarette to her mouth and took a big puff and laughed. He's blasphemed and gambled and stole and done wrong his entire life. He has no use for religion or anyone religious. And I said, so he doesn't have a pastor? And she laughed and said, certainly not. I said, well, then he wouldn't mind perhaps that if I was today his pastor. She goes, go ahead if it makes you feel better. So we drove to the hospital, and the young man and I walked into the ICU, and there was a man, a hardy man that had lived his party his whole life, strong, but now broken, with a tube stuck in his neck that was barely keeping him alive, and wires going to his body, and IVs and breathing machines. The nurse was running by. She handed me a little glass of water with a bunch of sponges on the end of these little sticks, and said, dip these in the water and stick them in his mouth because his mouth is dry, because on a breathing machine, you can't drink water. Like, it's not normal, like your mouth dries out. And so I took the little sponge and I put it in the glass and I put it into his mouth, and he would grab it eagerly and squeeze all the moisture out of it and just let it kind of moisturize his mouth. And I was doing this while I was talking to him. A man that probably never wanted any help from anyone now was so glad that somebody would just put a little drop of water on his tongue. I began to talk to him about Jesus. And I said, I know that you've lived your life without God, that you've blasphemed God your entire life, but I'm here to tell you that in the final hour of your life, if this is your final hour, that Christ in all his mercy and all his grace and all his power can bring to you eternal life that will extend beyond this bed and this condition. And I said, Butch, would you like to receive Jesus Christ in your heart right now? And he nodded eagerly with his eyes wide open. He couldn't speak, but he was signaling that he did. And so we prayed, and he accepted Jesus Christ into his heart.